Will we ban free speech in America so Israel can continue committing genocide? That's the question. You probably saw that on Saturday, DHS agents followed a Palestinian Columbia student, Mahmud Halil, into his apartment building and said they had a warrant for his arrest. Halil, who was one of the lead negotiators in the Columbia University Gaza Solidarity encampment and is a permanent resident in the United States, was arrested in front of his 8 months pregnant wife and is now facing deportation. ICE sent him to be detained in rural Louisiana, as far away from his family and lawyers as possible. Currently, a judge has halted the deportation process, and what comes next is yet to be seen. In a statement, a DHS spokesperson said Halil was arrested because he, quote, led activities aligned to Hamas. But we all know that his real crime was helping lead the movement against Israel's genocide, which ironically is the actual crime at play here. This is part of a years-long campaign by the Israel lobby to basically outlaw any criticism of Israel in the United States. Here's what you need to know. Public opinion has become Israel's Achilles heel in the US. People are starting to wake up to the fact that Israel isn't some kind of pluralistic democracy. It's an ethno-state, meaning it's a country based on the demographic supremacy of one ethnic group over another. The whole point of Israel as a country is to create a Jewish majority in Palestine by bringing Jews from all across the world to kick the native Palestinians out and build Jewish-only cities in their place.
Every single place and in every single land, every little spot, everything is the Jews. Not a single piece for other people, only for us.
Well, we don't have time to go through the entire history of this. We made a video about it called Israel's Goal Has Always Been Ethnic Cleansing, which you can search up on YouTube. But the point here is that more and more people are becoming acutely aware that Israel isn't this tiny victimized country that it says it is. Israel's post-October 7th genocide completely shattered this narrative. Not just the massacres, but the videos, the chants, the concerts, the TikTok trends, the branding of Palestinian prisoners with the Star of David, the Israeli army looting lingerie from Palestinian women they had killed. Let's not forget, Israel nearly descended into a civil war because Israelis felt like Israeli soldiers had a right to rape Palestinian prisoners. The whole framing of Israel as this helpless victim has been completely shattered by the images of a country reveling in slaughter and land theft. You'll see this written everywhere in pro-Israel publications, that the greatest international threat to Israel now isn't Hamas or Hezbollah. It's losing their whole international legitimacy as a state. Protests, court cases, and mass discussion of Israel's crimes have reshaped global consciousness and undermined the foundational apartheid principles of the state. This is why Israel has spent years trying to criminalize protests and free speech in the United States. There's no doubt that the White House itself made the decision to arrest Mahmud Halil. Trump had in fact personally honored the arresting agent years ago. It's part of the administration's political offensive to whip the universities into line and attack the Palestine movement at the same time. But what's not being discussed is the Israel lobby's role in all this. Trump's cabinet is stuffed to the brim with people who are closely connected to the Israel lobby: Marco Rubio, Mike Huckabee, Pete Hegseth, Elise Stefanik, Elon Musk, Mike Waltz, RFK Jr., Pam Bondi, Tulsi Gabbard. I actually don't think there's anyone in his cabinet who doesn't support Israel. One of the Trump campaign's largest donors was Miriam Adelson, who's a billionaire and Israel First mega donor that put over $100 million into the Trump campaign. The Israel lobby also openly aided the Trump administration in finding the students in this deportation effort. An Israeli group called Betar US, which is basically the US arm of the far-right Israeli Likud party, had been sending names of pro-Palestine student activists to the Trump administration for deportation. To give you a sense of these people, they posted recently that they wanted Israel to kill more Palestinian children. Literally, that's something they actually posted. On Twitter, they openly called for the students on the list they sent to the Trump administration to be deported and bragged that they would send even more names. This was only a few weeks before Mahmoud was arrested. Israel was also heavily involved in pushing the US TikTok ban. According to records, one of the main pro-Israel lobby groups, the Anti-Defamation League, and another pro-Israel group, Hadassah, lobbied in favor of the TikTok ban. The ADL called it an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that they were trying to ban TikTok, even though the CEO of the ADL himself, Jonathan Greenblatt, said multiple times on record that the app should be banned.
We need to talk about TikTok. TikTok, if you will, it is the 24/7 news channel of so many of our young people, and it's like Al Jazeera on steroids, amplifying and intensifying the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism with no repercussions. I've got to ask, Joe, like there's been a lot of lamentations about the fact that TikTok's ownership is Chinese, but you know what? Oracle owns 10% of the company. General Atlantic owns a piece of the company. Our friends at Sequoia Capital own a piece of the company. So does Sequoia and General Atlantic, does Oracle want to be responsible for spreading anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? It's time to talk about TikTok. And I think we need members of Congress to be asking them, why are they doing enough?
Capturing TikTok might seem less meaningful than holding on to Mount Hermon. Libelous tweets certainly might seem less deadly than missiles from Yemen. But this is urgent because the next war will be decided based on how Israel and its allies perform online as much as offline.
Prominent Israel lobby politicians like Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and Nikki Haley also cited anti-Israel content as the reason they supported punitive action against TikTok. Many of the most draconian speech laws that have been passed in the United States in the last few years have been laws regulating speech related to Israel. Throughout the 2010s, Israel lobby groups were pushing laws that made support for the Palestinian solidarity movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions a fireable offense. These laws, which were written almost identically, forced government contractors to pledge that they wouldn't boycott Israeli products. Refusing to sign would result in not being hired or being denied state funding. In one famous case, Empire Files journalist Abby Martin was disinvited from a speaking event at Georgia Southern University because she refused to sign a pledge saying she wouldn't boycott Israel. The ADL and APAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, endorsed and pushed these laws, which picked up the nickname loyalty oaths, despite the ADL's own internal reporting expressing concern that trying to censor pro-Palestine speech would only garner more support for the cause. There are 37 states in America that have passed these anti-speech laws. The main Israel lobby group in Washington, APAC, shapes U.S. policy on Israel by interfering in U.S. congressional elections and congressional affairs. It pushes every candidate running for Congress to take a stance on Israel and then directs massive cash flows to the candidate with more pro-Israel views. If there's any candidate that refuses to support Israel or is even marginally critical of it, APAC will support the candidate's opponent and spend tens of millions of dollars launching a smear campaign against that candidate. This is precisely what happened to progressive congressional incumbents like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. Once pro-Israel members are in Congress, they're showered with gifts, fancy dinners, and donations to keep them loyal. When big bills concerning Israel come up, they get their talking points from APAC lobbyists. There's a really good documentary about how the Israel lobby operates in America called The Lobby US, which you can find on the Electronic Intifada's YouTube page. I definitely recommend watching it. A few years ago, there was an entire controversy manufactured by the Israel lobby that it was actually anti-Semitic to say that APAC money was influencing members of Congress. But if you go on APAC's Twitter, they brag about how they win 95% of elections they intervene in and directly claimed responsibility for Bush and Bowman's defeats. So in other words, they can say they influence elections, but we can't. Even though the Israel lobby is trying hard to sustain US support for Israel, it's not working. At all. New polling data from Gallup shows US support for Israel at its lowest level in at least 24 years. Mahmud Halil's arrest was the latest temperature check on this, with the petition demanding his release getting 2.2 million signatures in 3 days. After 16 months of politicians resorting to genocide denial to continue arming and financing Israel, people are tired of being told that we're the ones in the wrong. Right now, Israel is cutting off humanitarian aid to millions of people they relentlessly carpet bombed for over a year. People are tired of the constant gaslighting from the pro-Israel politicians, myself included. I know Mahmoud personally. I was at the Columbia encampment with him and interviewed him a bunch of times about his story, his family, his dream to see the occupation end so he can go back to Palestine with his loved ones. The question for us is, how far does this go? What's next? The New York governor recently told the city it couldn't even have a Palestinian studies professor. Should we also ban books about Palestine? Should we make it anti-Semitic to use the word Palestine? Should we throw people in jail for saying that Israel shouldn't be allowed to bribe politicians? What exactly is the limit? The attack on Mahmoud isn't just an attack on one activist at Columbia. It's about all of our rights to speak up, to write, to keep telling the truth. Mahmoud's lawyer just put out a statement that even though he's in ICE detention, he's still undaunted. If Mahmoud is undaunted from a jail cell in Louisiana, the least we can do is be undaunted too.